From the Supreme Court today, there were clear signals that at least 5 justices could vote to reject the latest challenge to the Affordable Care Act. During arguments today, 2 conservative justices, Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh, indicated each is inclined to uphold the bulk of the law. This afternoon, President-elect Joe Biden spoke on the case.
Beginning on January 20th, the Vice President-elect Harris and I, we're going to do everything in our power to ease the burden of health care on you and your families. I promise you that. As I said, I will protect your health care like as with my own family. And we've been, unfortunately, significant consumers of health care. That starts by building on the Affordable Care Act, with the dramatic expansion of health care coverage and bold steps to lower health care costs.
Joining me now is Bloomberg Law Supreme Court reporter Kimberly Robinson. Kimberly is also an attorney, and she's covered the court for a decade. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to do it.
Great. So earlier today, we saw this conversation begin to unfold among the Supreme Court justices. Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Brett Kavanaugh indicated they'll likely support upholding the most of the Affordable Care Act. Is their decision something we expected? And how significant is it in the context of ongoing conversation on health care in the country?
Well, the main issue here for the justices is going to be what's known as severability, whether a part of the law that's unconstitutional is so important to the law that it must bring the entire law down. You may remember that the Affordable Care Act is not just about one provision, but has hundreds of provisions dealing with health care. So we've seen in earlier cases when the justices have been confronted with these types of situations that they've actually been reluctant to make a sweeping ruling taking down a whole statute. And in an earlier case last year, Chief Justice Roberts said that when the justices are asked to strike down an entire law, they should really be using a scalpel rather than a bulldozer. So this is something that we have expected from at least Chief Justice Roberts and also Kavanaugh as well.
And those who oppose the Affordable Care Act were counting on the 6-3 conservative majority. But with Roberts and Kavanaugh indicating that they will not support striking it down in its entirety, what's the next best option for those that were banking on that 6-3 split?
Well, the next option is really to get this repealed through Congress. But that's actually something that's very important to this case. This idea, again, of severability. The justices are supposed to look at what Congress would have wanted whenever they pass the law if a court were to find it unconstitutional. And we saw Chief Justice Roberts noting again and again that Congress tried and failed many times to repeal the entire act. And this was what they could come up with, just a compromise repeal of the most unpopular parts of Obamacare.
Now, it's been 10 years since Obamacare was enacted. One of the hot button issues, as you know, has been the so-called individual mandate. You've talked about all the different provisions not too long ago. Why has that particular part of the legislation sparked so much controversy?
Well, that's the part of the legislation which the Obama administration said was crucial in order to fund health insurance programs. And in particular, it requires that individuals who don't purchase health care, who don't get in that collective group of people who are being covered by insurance, that they have to pay a tax. And of course, taxes are not the most popular things. And so that has been one of the most controversial issues of Obamacare, even while we see really staunch opponents of the legislation embracing other provisions within the landmark legislation.
Do you think this is something that may be struck from the Affordable Care Act?
It does seem like there's a possibility that it could be struck from the Affordable Care Act, but the question is how much will that matter? And so the important event that this case really centers on is in 2017 when the GOP-led Congress actually brought that tax down to zero. So right now, there's really no penalty if you were not to comply with the individual mandate. So it's not clear what the Supreme Court, excising that part from the whole law, will really have as a practical matter.
Now, we're all expecting a decision on this case in June 2021. I wonder how much the ongoing pandemic may play a role in the justices' decisions. Do you have any intel on that?
Well, we saw that the pandemic come up a lot today. We saw the advocates who were urging the justices not to do away with the entire Affordable Care Act, mentioning that, this would really throw the healthcare system into chaos during this pandemic. And, it's questionable whether or not the justices should be thinking about anything other than the law, whether or not they should be thinking about, the real world situations. But just like us, their lives have been disrupted. They've been hearing arguments remotely since March for the first time in their 200-year history. So it's hard to see how this doesn't come into at least the back of their minds while they're thinking about this case.
Right, because right now COVID-19 is not considered a pre-existing condition under the Affordable Care Act. But I wonder if the court amends this law, may that change?
Well, right now, the Affordable Care Act says that you can't discriminate based on pre-existing conditions when someone's trying to get insurance. If the court does away with the entire law, of course, those protections won't be there. And we could see insurance companies discriminate against those with COVID who have had really severe symptoms, those who have had long-term symptoms. And again, there's really nothing in place right now to substitute that and to prevent that from happening.
Okay, very, very last question quickly. What are some of the other arguments or one other argument or consideration that we can expect to hear about as this case continues?
Well, one argument that isn't as interesting but is very important is the issue of standing, whether or not certain parties can sue. And this is going to be very important for states going forward. This is how many states challenge administrative policies against administrations that they don't agree with. We've seen a lot of work under the Trump administration by Democratic-led states, and I would expect under a Biden administration to see a lot of work by GOP-led states. So it'll be interesting to see what the Supreme Court says on that topic.
Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see what this entire case turns out to be, especially as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining us.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.